Greetings, Class 702. Today we are discussing person-centered therapy, which is the trademark of Carl Rogers, who many people refer to as the single most influential therapist of the past quarter century. This is a gentleman who's done a lot for the field, so much so that he was actually nominated for a Nobel Peace Prize. Much of what he talks about is built upon what we discussed in the last couple of weeks with existential therapy. And also deals with a lot with humanistic psychology and humanistic psychotherapy. A lot of ideas that pay attention to what makes us human, what makes us uniquely human, and it's kind of building upon that. Now, Carl Rogers started this process back in the 1940s, and he worked on it through the 1980s. And it's something that's, like much of the theories that we've been discussing, is constantly evolving, and we're going to talk about a couple of the stages that it went through. But it's important to keep in mind that this was an evolution that really started in the 1940s. It shares a lot with the existential therapy that we discussed beforehand. It operates on the premise that people are trustworthy, that they are inherently good, if you will. People have vast potential for understanding themselves and for resolving their own issues. That shows that we are capable human beings, that we have the ability to be introspective, and we can look at ourselves and process and analyze ourselves and gain valuable information from that. We are also capable of self-directed growth, that we are able to improve upon ourselves by our own will. That is something that is shared with existential therapy. And one of the key components to the person-centered therapy is the client-patient relationship. So that this is the single most important factor in determining whether or not therapy is going to be successful, is the actual relationship itself. How things feel in the counseling session. Are you comfortable? Are you feeling supported? What is the general vibe that's going on? And is that conducive to some sort of catharsis, something that you're trying to accomplish with your therapy? Where person-centered therapy stands out is the again, remember, this is revolutionary for its time, is the premise that clients are going to figure out for themselves what works best for them. No longer is counselor know best philosophy. This is a client knows best way of looking at things. It's up to us as the client to enter into the counseling session, and eventually we are going to be the ones coming up with the solutions. Now it's up to us as the counselor to help create that environment that's going to help them realize for themselves exactly what they need to realize. So this therapy is not so much about techniques as opposed to some of the previous ones and some of the ones that we're going to discuss in the future. It's more kind of setting up the general vibe, setting up the general feeling that goes on in the counseling therapy that person-centered theorists say is the prime determinant of success. I just want to talk briefly about the periods of development of person-centered therapy. I want to remind you that it started in the 1940s. Again, operates on the client knows best perspective, and that's through non-directive counseling, where people are meant to reflect and clarify their own remarks, and we're trying to become aware and get a little bit of insight into our feelings. It changed in the 1950s to client-centered therapy. Again, a little bit more focus on the client and their phenomenological world, their own subjective world. In the 60s, there was a little bit more focus on the conditions of therapy, how trust is so important, and the importance of building that relationships in terms of how that helps moving forward. And then in the later stages of Rogers' career with the person-centered therapy, he talked about how these ideas can be applied to education, and industry and world peace and politics, and particularly healthcare. And you can think about perhaps a cancer patient and asking them, what ways they would like to treat themselves. You know, asking the patient themselves for their input in terms of some sort of treatment. So you can see how some of these ideas kind of spread into some of the other things in life that Carl Rogers was interested in the later stages of development. So in the 1960s and 1970s, at this stage there was about 3 forms of therapy. There was psychoanalytic, which we discussed earlier. That's the whole Freud, Adlerian kind of perspective. There's behavioral kind of therapy, which we have not talked about yet, but we'll be talking about in the coming weeks. And then there's the existential branch. We talked a little bit about existentialism in general in the last video lecture. We're also talking about person-centeredness and person-centered therapy. And also in the next lecture, we're going to be talking about Gestalt. So existentialism, person-centered, and Gestalt all kind of fall under this general existential headline, which was one of the 3 kind of general theories that were popular by the 1960s and 1970s. It shares a lot with existentialism. It shares a lot with respect to the client's subjective world, the uniqueness of the individual, the trust that a client can make positive decisions for themselves, and obviously a lot of value on freedom and choice and taking responsibilities for those things. It kind of differs a little bit in the fact that it doesn't emphasize so much the anxiety and the dread and some of those death components that existentialism has. And remember that one of the key things is that that there's the capacity for self-awareness and self-healing. So one, that we can become aware of issues ourselves, and 2, that we are capable alone of fixing issues ourselves. So what is person-centered theory? It's more of a feeling, and some of the components of that is that a therapist must show that they are real, that they're not being phony, that they are just coming at you straight and you can believe what they say, and that there's no show going on. 2, that they're supportive. Obviously, you're coming to someone for their help, and you want to know that the person that you're talking to genuinely cares, which is also another component, is that they actually care. So they're willing to support you, and they care. And then another component that a therapist must show is non-judgmental understanding. To accept one without our prejudices and without the filters and screens that we may put upon ourselves. Someone may come to you with a vastly different perspective on life, but that we can still be non-judgmental and understand and empathize with them. So the 3 attributes that a therapist must have in order to kind of foster growth, in order to help promote some sort of catharsis or change, would be one would be congruence, that genuineness, that realness that we talked about before. You want your therapist to be congruent, to be straightforward, I guess, with you. 2, the unconditional positive regard, that caring despite the fact that you might not necessarily agree with them, but the fact that they can almost in a sense do no wrong, that they're able to kind of explain how they feel or explain what they're doing or acting, and it'd be okay without someone kind of wagging their finger or asking them to kind of question the way that they're doing things. And then number 3, an important part, is accurate empathy. Being able to show someone that you really do understand and that you really do care. And that's something that, you can kind of fake, but anyone who's ever been in a situation, you may realize when someone's faking it. It has to be genuine and it has to be real. So when you foster those 3 things, the congruence, the unconditional positive regard, and the accurate empathy, the client becomes less defensive, more open, more willing to kind of go deeper into their psyche, into their thoughts, and really creates a positive environment. And that's really what we're striving for here.